If you've ever tried building a UI in Python, you know that managing the state, all the data that makes your app tick, can get really complicated really fast. Well, today we're diving into a powerful pattern for the Flet framework that promises to change all of that. It's called Flet ASP. So what is it, really? Well, think of Flet ASP as a library that brings some of the magic from modern web frameworks right into your Python Flet apps. It's all about making your application's state predictable, easy to test, and just declarative. You say what you want the UI to look like, and Flet ASP handles the how. Here's a quick look at what we're going to cover. We'll start with the basics of what Flet ASP is. Then we'll get into its absolute core building block, the reactive atom. After that, we'll see how to build on that with derived state, handle tricky stuff like API calls, and finally wrap it all up with a really professional design system.
All right, so let's get into it. What really makes Flet ASP so special? Why should you even care? Let's break down some of the key features that make this such a game changer for Flet developers.
You get this whole awesome toolkit, right? The biggest deal is reactive atoms. You can pretty much forget about manually calling page.update all the time. The UI just updates itself. You can also easily create calculated values with things called selectors, and you can untangle your messy UI code by using actions for complex stuff like API calls. And the best part? It's super lightweight, it's completely type-safe, and it has zero external dependencies. Okay, now let's talk about the absolute heart of Flet ASP. This is the fundamental piece that everything, and I mean everything, is built on. Let's talk about the atom. So an atom is the smallest possible piece of state. Think of it as the single source of truth for just one value. It could be the number in a counter, a user's name, or whether a checkbox is ticked. And here's the magic. Whenever that value changes, any UI element you've connected to it just reacts. It all happens automatically. And let's look at some code, because this is where it gets really clear. See how simple this is for a counter? First, you use page.state.atom to create the state itself, and you give it a starting value. Then, you bind it to a UI element like a text control. And finally, when you want to change it, you just set a new value. That's it. The UI takes care of itself. So that little three-step process is really the secret sauce. 1, create your state. 2, connect it to your UI. And 3, whenever you update that state, the UI just updates automatically. It's a really simple, predictable, and incredibly powerful pattern. Okay, so that's basic state handled. But let's be real, UIs get more complex than that, right? What happens when one piece of your state actually depends on another piece of state? Yeah, this is a classic problem. You've got a first name atom and a last name atom. So how do you get a full name that automatically updates whenever the first or last name changes without writing a bunch of boilerplate code? And Flet ASP has a really elegant answer for this, the selector. A selector isn't state you set yourself. Instead, it's state that is derived from other atoms. You just write a simple function to calculate the value, and it automatically reruns whenever its dependencies change. You'll never have to manually sync that full name again. And the code for this? Oh, it's just beautiful. It's so clean. You just pop this simple little @page.state.selector decorator on top of a regular Python function, and boom, it's now a reactive selector. This full name will now always be up to date with zero extra work from you. Now, binding gets a major upgrade too. The standard bind is great for one-way data flow, from your state to the UI. But bind two-way creates this perfect automatic sync in both directions. It's an absolute dream for form inputs like text fields, where you need what the user types to immediately update your app state and vice versa. Okay, so we can handle simple state and we can handle derived state. But what about the really messy stuff? The real-world complexity, like fetching data from an API or authenticating a user. Well, that's exactly what actions are for. Actions are all about creating a clean separation of your logic. I mean, think about how ugly a button's on-click handler can get, right? You've got API calls, loading states, error handling. It's a mess. An action lets you take all of that complex business logic and move it completely out of your UI code. It makes everything incredibly clean, reusable, and way easier to test. Just look at this code snippet. The login action function handles the entire process. It sets a loading state, it does the async API call, and it updates the user state when it's done. So what's left in your button's click handler? Pretty much just one line, login.run async. All that complexity is just neatly encapsulated away. So clean. So we have our building blocks. We've got atoms, we've got selectors, and we've got actions. But how do we actually use these to build a large application that's easy to maintain and doesn't turn into a total mess? And this is where things get really professional. Flet ASP is designed to work perfectly with a well-known methodology called atomic design. And this is a serious, industry-standard approach for building UIs that can actually scale. The idea is actually pretty intuitive. It's inspired by chemistry. You start with the absolute smallest UI elements, your atoms, like a button or an input field. You combine those into functional molecules, like a search bar. Then you group those into more complex organisms, like a site header. You arrange those in templates, and finally, you pour real data into those templates to create your finished pages. And here's the real payoff. The whole point of this is that you build a component, like that search bar, just once. Then you can reuse it all over your application on completely different pages, simply by binding it to different state atoms each time. It's incredibly efficient.
Putting these two things together, Flet ASP and Atomic Design, is just a massive win. It gives you this professional framework for building apps that are consistent, super reusable, and just way easier to scale and test. And because Flet ASP is reactive, state changes just naturally flow right through that component hierarchy.
So let's just boil it all down one last time. It's really three core ideas. The atom is your single source of truth. It holds the state. The selector computes new derived state from those atoms. And the action is your structured, clean way to handle complex changes to that state, especially when async stuff is involved. Look, Flet ASP provides a really clear, declarative, and scalable way to manage what is often the hardest part of building an application. It basically frees you from worrying about keeping your UI in sync with your data, so you can focus on what actually matters, building awesome features. So the only real question left is, what are you going to build with it?